Godzilla Earth. It stands 300 meters tall and weighs 100,000 metric tons, the largest on-screen incarnation of the character ever committed to film, appearing for the first time in animation in Godzilla, Planet of the Monsters in 2017. Godzilla Earth originated from plant life, a detail that shapes its whole impact within the anime trilogy. Godzilla Earth first emerged in 2030 at the Tanzawa Forest Pass, as established in the film. By 2048, after 18 years of escalating failure, humanity reached a clear and brutal conclusion. It stood no chance. The entire species fled Earth to colonize Taui in the Cetus constellation aboard the Eratrum, leaving the planet behind. After 20,000 years, when the Eratrum returned, the world they found bore no resemblance to the one they had abandoned. A bizarre new ecosystem had sprung up around Godzilla Earth, now the dominant being on the planet. During those millennia, it had eliminated every rival kaiju and resisted all attempts at destruction. Human military campaigns, strategic innovation, and even the assistance of humanity's alien allies, all failed completely. Godzilla Earth's form grew from 50 meters and 10,000 metric tons to 300 meters and 100,000 metric tons over 20,000 years. The name Godzilla Earth symbolizes that dominion over 20,000 years of planetary rule, though the film never uses it in spoken dialogue. That plants could do any of this requires an explanation that the films never provide. A plant-based organism eliminated every competing apex predator across an entire planet, outlasted human military technology for 2 decades, survived alien weaponry, and then grew 300 meters tall purely through biological processes. The ordinary explanation would demand a mechanism, a metabolic pathway, a genetic toolkit, some cascade of evolutionary pressures that produce thermonuclear energy, super-dense cellular tissue, and the ecological authority to restructure a planet's entire biosphere around its own presence. That mechanism is never shown, never described, never even gestured at. The films present the outcome and skip the process entirely. Nobody investigates the biology. Nobody asks how photosynthesis scales to city-destroying energy projection. The question of how a plant achieves dominance over all animal life on a planetary scale is simply left open. Godzilla Filius. This is not a separate kaiju. It is a parasitic offspring, a subspecies of Godzilla Earth, formed from cells that divided from the parent organism during the 20,000 years it ruled Earth, a category shift from independent monster to biological extension. Godzilla Filius is referred to as a servant of Godzilla Earth, a designation that shapes its role in the narrative. Godzilla Filius stood 50 meters tall and weighed 10,000 metric tons, nearly identical to Godzilla Earth when he first appeared in 2030. It was living in the former Tanzawa area when the Eratrum returned to Earth, precisely positioned to intercept the human forces. Servum are conspecifics and allies of Godzilla Filius within the established continuity. Here's where it gets harder to explain. Cells divided from Godzilla Earth 20,000 years ago drifted or were carried across a transformed planet, assembled into a 50-meter organism, and then, without any apparent communication, without parental care, without a nervous system connecting them to the parent, behaved as a servant of that parent. A plant-based organism somehow produced a separated cell mass that could grow to 50 meters, retain the physical template of the parent's earlier form, and function as a directed extension of the parent's will. The mechanism is not explored. Researchers within the film's own narrative do not explain it. The Hutua's description of Filius as a servant is presented as observation, not understanding. Haruo Sakaki destroyed Godzilla Filius by exploiting its only weakness. Godzilla Earth had a biological mechanism for planetary dominance. Filius suggests there was a second, equally unexplained mechanism for producing subordinate organisms from its own tissue. Both capabilities point to a biology the films show the results of but never explain the rules for. Subscribe and tell us in the comments which monster you think was the most fitting. Let's get back into it. Servum. And if Filius had at least been given a name, something to distinguish him from the monolith that spawned him, the Servum didn't even get that. They are the living proof that Godzilla Earth's 20,000-year reign produced more than just a single superorganism, and what it produced was far worse than a silent god. It produced an army of things with no minds at all. They are a subspecies of Godzilla that evolved during that reign, and they fall into exactly 2 categories. The flying type is a thin, dark blue body built on dragon-like wings, with pointed spikes running along its back and multiple red eyes. The worm type is considerably smaller, 6.5 meters in length, and compensates for its size with burrow underground. Both emerged at Tanzawa Forest Pass, which makes sense because Godzilla Earth is their progenitor and Godzilla Filius is biologically the same kind of creature as the Servum, conspecific, meaning they share the same subspecies. He was a worm that grew large and developed a few thoughts before dissolving back into the biomass. The Servum are what happens when that process doesn't get interrupted by anything resembling consciousness. The name gives them away entirely. Servum comes from the Latin servus, servant or slave. That's what they are. They remain in proximity to Godzilla Earth, circling it like attendants. Their lives follow a single rigid loop. Fly, burrow, eat. A food chain runs through them. Flying-type prey on worm-type prey on smaller animals. Instinct is the only operating system they run on. After Godzilla Earth decimated the United Earth forces, survivors stumbled into a marsh and found worm-type Servum moving through the water. Flying-type arrived behind them to feed on the carcasses Godzilla Earth had left, then turned on the humans. The Servum don't distinguish between enemy and food, they distinguish between moving and not moving, and humans qualify either way. Two flying-type Servum positioned near the foot of Mount Fuji were killed and assimilated by MechaGodzilla City's nanometal, a system that consumes biological material and converts it into structure. Even the one technology designed to oppose Godzilla Earth found the Servum worth consuming. When Ghidorah appeared, the Servum were seen fleeing when Ghidorah appeared, and later present flying around the victorious Godzilla Earth. They are never named in the films. The name Servum exists only outside the dialogue. Every enemy they have, humans, other Servum, MechaGodzilla City, kills them without thinking, because they were never built to matter. Zilla. At least the Servum exist as something the films actually show you. Zilla doesn't appear on screen in the anime trilogy. It is mentioned as a theorized approximate species related to Godzilla Earth. It is further featured in the novel Godzilla Monster Apocalypse, which expands on its place in this continuity. A creature with a chapter devoted to it is referenced off-screen in one line and never heard from again. That's not an absence. The trilogy had no interest in explaining what Zilla was, or what it meant, and the novel had already done the heavy lifting. The trilogy's canon identifies Zilla as a theorized approximate species, and does not confirm its exact relation to Godzilla Earth. What this reveals about the system is that the anime trilogy maintained two separate layers of world-building that almost never touched. The on-screen films ran lean and minimal, treating monsters as set dressing or obstacles, while the novel Monster Apocalypse ran dense and elaborate, populating the continuity with entire chapters of creatures and explanations the movies never referenced. The trilogy's monster roster looks complete until you read the book and realize half the roster never left the page. Biollante. Zilla's so-called kinship to Godzilla Earth tried to play by the book, trace the monster's lineage, draw the family tree. But Biollante blows that whole instinct to dust. This isn't about who fits where or which kaiju follows which genetic line. The entire idea of a rulebook for species relations collapses the second Biollante enters the picture. She shouldn't exist, not according to any coherent system. And yet, in the anime continuity, she's not just possible, she's written directly into its scientific framework. A genetically engineered kaiju appearing in the Onigoji continuity's prequel material, Godzilla Monster Apocalypse. The Monster Apocalypse timeline doesn't hedge its bets. Biollante is explicitly described as the result of combining these biological elements. To call her a hybrid is an understatement. What you have is a living proof of concept that Godzilla's cellular makeup is not selective or even stable. You take Godzilla's cells, add them to a rose, and suddenly you don't get a super rose. You get a monster. Add human DNA into the mix, now you've got a kaiju wrapped in plant tissue, carrying human genetics, every strand compelled toward a single endpoint determined entirely by Godzilla's biology. The integrity of each species is not just compromised, it's overwritten. The plant DNA, the human DNA, none of them stand up. The presence of Godzilla's genes acts as a solvent, breaking down boundaries, asserting a singular identity over everything it touches. It's a relationship that annihilates the whole idea of distinct evolutionary branches. Biollante doesn't resemble an offshoot, or even a mutant off-model. She becomes another expression of Godzilla's own species, stamped onto whatever canvas you start with. The theorized approximate species relation isn't speculation, it's a warning label. All routes back to Godzilla are one-way streets. The more you examine it, the clearer it gets. Godzilla's cells are not content to participate, they take over. And it's not just biology at work here, it's something more aggressive. Call it cellular imperialism. Each new host is forced to conform to the master plan dictated by Godzilla's original template, regardless of its origin. And that's what's hiding right in plain sight. Anywhere Godzilla's genetic material ends up, it isn't just a contaminant or a mutation, it's a blueprint and a command. Biollante is nothing less than a demonstration that no matter what you combine with him, flora or fauna, Godzilla's DNA rewrites the story. In pure, pragmatic terms, it means the moment you start splicing with Godzilla, you don't get hybrid vigor. You get Godzilla's will, bulldozing its way through every cell line. And Toho isn't subtle about it. Biollante's creation was never about what happens when life evolves alongside Godzilla, it's about what happens when Godzilla's biology refuses to tolerate rivals, when hybrid is just a polite word for inevitable conquest. That's why Biollante works the way she does. In-universe, the mechanics look like botched super science, but behind the scenes, Toho designed Biollante to answer a direct need, show the horrifying reach of Godzilla's mutation. The monster is an argument in flesh, built for an audience who needed to see that no good intention or peaceful experiment survives contact with Godzilla's genetic material. Biollante isn't a counterweight or a failed ally. She's a thesis statement. Godzilla's existence doesn't just destroy the world, it breaks the rules about what life even means. Orga, the evolutionary nightmare, doesn't slow down. Zilla's tangled hypothetical was at least indirect. Orga is what happens when someone grabs the Godzilla playbook and skips straight to page 50, in the wrong language. In Godzilla Planet of the Monsters, the monster called Orga makes its presence known in Turkey. Its birth triggered not by chance mutation but by alien intervention, a biological experiment that really should have stayed theoretical. The Millennian aliens made contact with Godzilla's cells and didn't just harvest a few tricks. They extracted Organizer G1, the deep system substance that gives Godzilla his regenerative powers and essentially bulletproofs his species against extinction. Absorb that G1, and the consequences barrel forward without hesitation. There isn't even a pause between hypothesis and reaction. Millennian meets Organizer G1. Organizer G1 hijacks Millennian biology. That's the whole story in the space between one cell division and the next. Orga is the result, a mutant hybrid, identified alternately as Millennian or Orga in different catalogs, but every label points to the same event, the moment alien tissue was reprogrammed to mimic and exceed its source, chasing after Godzilla's durability like a heat-seeking missile. Even the name Orga isn't just a brand, it's a forensic record. This is Organizer G1, not just present, but in absolute command. The transformation was never intended to be static. Orga's earliest state, Phase 1, shows exactly how Organizer G1 reorders priorities. Sheer physical power comes first, stability a distant second. The features are grotesque, not yet Godzilla-like, but the direction is set. As more of Godzilla's DNA is integrated, Orga accelerates into Phase 2, the shape now echoing the original, the changes stacking up at a compound rate. It isn't a polite process. Every dose of DNA pushes the mutation further from its roots and closer to a new equilibrium, a configuration where individuality means nothing, unless it supports the Godzilla template. But the system quickens, and so does the desperation. Orga doesn't settle for slow absorption, doesn't let Organizer G1 chart its own course. The playbook is thrown out. Orga attempts to engulf Godzilla wholesale, to swallow him, and force his entire biology into immediate service. Absorption through physical violence, a shortcut that ignores the limits of adaptation. The evidence stacks up on both sides. At first, the mutation works exactly as intended, with Orga's features shifting rapidly to echo Godzilla and Organizer G1 asserting dominance. But the escalation becomes its own undoing. The process is incomplete, the transformation never given time to stabilize, and the body can't survive what the experiment started. So the infamous jaws open wider, gaping with the bright ambition of something that never figured out where to stop. Spines unfurl along the back, the body swollen and half transfigured, the silhouette balancing between what it was and what it was meant to be. This isn't a monster with a clear form or ambition. This is a snapshot of mutation running out of room, biology suspended between two incompatible directives. And there, right at the moment when Orga tries to overwrite Godzilla with a single swallow, the process snaps. The result hangs in the frame. A creature sentenced to become Godzilla in every cell, but denied a path to coherence, caught forever just shy of the finish. Dogora. And Orga's grotesque viral biology was alarming enough, a single organism grafting itself to one man, consuming him from the inside out, but Dogora operates on a completely different scale of catastrophe, one measured in millions of lives rather than a single infected human. It first surfaces over London as an irregularly shaped, semi-transparent jellyfish drifting through the air. The monster stretched out its translucent hands from the heavens, brought down the London Bridge, crushed Big Ben, and preyed upon many British citizens. British and NATO forces responded with everything they had in their arsenal, and their aggression made the situation catastrophically worse. Dogora absorbed the thermal energy from the military strikes and moved on to ravage Manchester. Rather than being stopped, Dogora continued its rampage, moving on to ravage Manchester. The casualty toll across the cities it destroyed on its path from London to Manchester reached an estimated 3.9 million people, a figure that makes Dogora one of the deadliest kaiju in the trilogy's history, a reminder that Godzilla was never Earth's only extinction-level threat. The full account of this devastation appears in the prequel novel Monster Apocalypse, because within the films themselves, Dogora's role has been reduced to something closer to a historical footnote, a cameo appearance, a spectral image in a montage of past disasters, a ghost haunting the margins of a story that clearly remembers what Earth cost but has no time left to mourn it. Dogora's weakness was sparrow bee venom, which caused its cells to crystallize and shatter. It is a strangely poetic end for a creature that defined itself through scale and appetite, killed not by something bigger but by something smaller than the bombs that empowered it, leaving behind only a crystalline residue where millions once lived. The reason Dogora lingers in viewers' minds despite its minutes of screen time is that it represents something the trilogy rarely shows outright, a world that was already broken before Godzilla ever woke up, a humanity that spent decades losing wars against monsters it barely understood. MechaGodzilla. And if Dogora represented a horror humanity had already survived and catalogued, MechaGodzilla represents a horror humanity almost built for itself, one that was constructed deliberately, with full awareness of what it was, and then abandoned before it ever had the chance to finish the job. The Biollante faction designed and assembled the autonomous fortress city specifically to fight Godzilla, a weapon engineered to the scale of the threat it was meant to counter, but humanity was forced to abandon Earth before MechaGodzilla could ever be activated, leaving behind a dormant machine half-finished and half-forgotten. The city lay broken and inert until something unexpected happened. Its artificial intelligence rebuilt itself from the wreckage into something even more formidable than its creators had planned. MechaGodzilla City, a sprawling biomechanical organism of nanometal that had repurposed its own construction systems into a living, expanding intelligence. When Haruo and his expedition locate the remains of MechaGodzilla's head in the second film, they do not find a relic or a tomb. They find an opportunity, because the city's nanometal can replicate any structure at incredible speed, making it the ideal material for building a trap capable of finishing Godzilla permanently. The Biollante have their own and far more radical vision for that same material. They propose a permanent physical fusion with the nanometal, a process that would dissolve their bodies into the city's construction systems, weaving their consciousness into an immortal collective that would never age, never die, never fear anything ever again, but at the cost of everything that makes them human, every memory, every sensation, every identity that cannot be expressed as data. Godzilla is lured into the city as part of the Alliance's plan, and everything appears to be working, until Haruo learns what the nanometal actually does at full capacity. It does not merely build structures, it absorbs all organic life on the planet and converts it into more of itself, an endless feedback loop of consumption that would leave Earth a bare, sterile shell of metallic replication within years. In that moment, the creature they spent 3 years hunting stops being the target and becomes the only weapon capable of destroying the city before its expansion consumes everything that still lives. Haruo makes the call that defines the trilogy's moral core. He saves Godzilla, and Godzilla burns MechaGodzilla City to the ground, incinerating the nanometal with atomic fire and ending the threat permanently. That act is not simply a plot resolution. It is the trilogy's clearest statement that some forms of progress are not victories but erasures, and that preserving what makes us human sometimes means choosing the monster over the machine built to replace you. King Ghidorah. If you thought MechaGodzilla was a threat in isolation, King Ghidorah changes the game by warping the laws that govern absolutely everything. Nothing is safe. Not physics, not cause and effect, not even Godzilla Earth's size or strength. Ghidorah doesn't just challenge opponents, it rewrites the playing field. In the anime Godzilla trilogy, every appearance comes with a warning. This is the King of the Void, the God of the Void, titles outright given in 2018 press materials. That's not rhetorical. Ghidorah's arrival in the Planet Eater isn't a kaiju attack, it's an invasion from outside reality itself. Start with the basics. 3 heads, draconic form, extraterrestrial origin. That all sounds familiar enough if you've watched any classic kaiju film. But the anime doesn't just introduce King Ghidorah as another monster, it elevates him into something categorical. In the Trilogy continuity, Ghidorah's species is an extra-dimensional energy being, existing outside the known laws of physics. No earthbound physics binds him. He's not a beast from the deep or the result of scientific meddling, he's the embodiment of cosmic horror. The Trilogy's Ghidorah is a gravitational anomaly, a physical impossibility. When summoned, he devours energy, warps space, and renders the king of monsters powerless by breaking the very rules that define power. But contrast this with the ordinary versions. The Ghidorah of classic Toho, first strutting onto the scene in 1964's Ghidorah, the 3-headed monster, was devastating, no question. Still, it was ultimately the sum of its parts. Big, destructive, unmistakably physical. That Ghidorah blasted things apart with gravity beams and flew circles around Godzilla, but at least you could hit it, and the world it threatened kept spinning. Here, in the anime trilogy, Ghidorah is a presence rather than a body, moving between dimensions, untouchable to any weapon devised. Even Godzilla Earth is vulnerable to Ghidorah's energy-draining attacks, unable to achieve his scarlet form while Ghidorah is present. When Ghidorah enters, nothing that was true about monster fights stays true. It's tempting to give credit to the trilogy for the spectacle. Ghidorah's visual emergence is both horrifying and majestic. The strongest case for this approach is simple. Making King Ghidorah a force of cosmic lawlessness raises every stake, making Godzilla's struggle more desperate and the world's fate more uncertain. That part works. But the appeal falls apart if you expect clean logic from the rules. However spectacular the incarnation, Ghidorah's reality-breaking presence means there's no conventional answer to his power, no satisfying logic to his defeat. The threat is existential, not tactical. What's proven here isn't just about Ghidorah, it's about what the anime trilogy thinks monsters can be. Monsters aren't just physical opponents anymore, they're cosmic phenomena, capable of overriding everything ordinary kaiju stories taught us. Ghidorah, the King of the Void, makes it clear. When the trilogy escalates, it doesn't simply add bigger monsters. It expands the very idea of what monster means, tearing up the limits, and making the impossible happen right on screen. Anguirus. Suddenly the monstrous threat isn't distant or abstract, it's right there in the dirt and debris, close enough to leap into the fray. Anguirus' cameo in City on the Edge of Battle might be brief, but its mere arrival raises the sense of danger. Here, you're not dealing with cosmic horror or world-eating anomalies. Instead, it's a monster that literally moves underfoot. Anguirus, created by Motoyoshi Oda, first appeared in 1955's Godzilla Raids Again. The Onigoji version first surfaced in the prequel novel Godzilla, Monster Apocalypse. This kaiju is all business, all teeth, all armor. And the resemblance isn't accidental. Features borrowed from Ankylosaurus, Ceratosaurus, and Styracosaurus stack into a creature that's both familiar and terrifying. Anguirus isn't just a quadrupedal bruiser. 5 brains, distributed with surgical precision, one in the skull, one above each limb, give Anguirus an edge on reflexes that borders on impossible. Reaction time is nearly instant, which isn't just a gimmick. In battle, it matters more than size or strength. For a monster that looks as alien as it does, this versatility is strange, almost uncanny. Few creatures switch sides with this kind of speed. There's a hard objection here, but the evidence hits harder. The regenerative ability, the distributed brains, the superhuman durability were all baked into its design from the very first appearance. The redeeming point is that these aren't afterthoughts. Every ability lines up with the monster's instinct for survival, not narrative convenience. The monster operates on mechanisms: speed, healing, toughness. In a world where most threats are remote and existential, Anguirus brings the danger up close and makes kaiju conflict immediate. Godzilla Ultima. And if Anguirus represented a threat that could, under specific conditions, be contained, then Godzilla Ultima represents the conditions themselves refusing to be contained. In Godzilla the Planet Eater, the creature the trilogy has spent 2 films tracking finally sheds the last vestige of the Godzilla we met at the start of Planet of the Monsters, and adopts a subtitle that reads less like a characterization and more like a warning label: ultimate life form. By the time the final film assigns that designation, it isn't declaring victory, it's conceding that the category of monster no longer applies, and that humanity's entire framing of the conflict has been wrong from the beginning. Godzilla doesn't evolve into Godzilla Ultima through rage or a nuclear catalyst or any of the traditional kaiju transformation triggers. The trilogy continuity makes the mechanism unambiguous. 20,000 years of continuous, uninterrupted growth, with nothing on Earth capable of applying pressure that would halt the process. The numbers are specific. Those figures are the accumulated result of 20,000 years of biological expansion with no competition and no ceiling. Godzilla didn't peak and then transcend. It simply kept going because nothing told it to stop. There is no final form in the dramatic sense. No climactic power-up unlocked in the last act. The ultimate life form subtitle is earned through duration, not intensity. Godzilla reached a size where the planet's ecosystems function around it rather than against it, where other species either adapt to its presence or vanish, where the designation of kaiju, a creature in conflict with the environment, stops making sense because Godzilla has become the environment. That reframes every monster the human survivors have faced across the trilogy. They weren't fighting Godzilla, they were living inside the timeline of a creature that had already won, and the final film simply makes that explicit. Rodan. Where Godzilla Ultima was the same force grown beyond recognition, Rodan is a different animal entirely, a creature wearing a name audiences recognize, deployed in a context that has nothing to do with the monster it nominally is. The skeletal remains of a Rodan appear in the prologue of Godzilla, Planet of the Monsters, alongside the bones of Anguirus, displayed as forensic evidence of kaiju activity before Godzilla Earth's dominion. A cameo, nothing more. A few seconds of screen time confirming that this world had a monster ecology prior to the arrival of the big one. But the prequel novel Godzilla Monster Apocalypse tells you what that skeleton actually came from, and the answer recontextualizes everything. That distinction matters more than the prologue lets on. Rodan didn't fall to a superior predator. Rodan was erased by the very species it had come to terrorize, and the method of that erasure, a purpose-built bioweapon rather than natural selection or inter-kaiju combat, marks Rodan's species as the only confirmed kaiju eliminated by human ingenuity, rather than Godzilla Earth's eventual supremacy. The prequel novel Project MechaGodzilla fills in the broader picture across the following decades. The Rodan species remained a persistent global threat in the decades before Godzilla Earth's arrival. The species was still spreading, still multiplying, still a global military problem right up until Ghidorah neutralized the population. Rodan appears in the anime trilogy as part of the earlier kaiju activity documented in the prequel novels. Rodan is a species that had a global footprint, a military capable of pushing it back, and a documented record of territorial expansion. And then it was simply deleted by a chemical weapon. A species that once covered the planet survives now only as a skeleton in a prologue and scattered pages in 2 prequel novels.